welcome to this Audit and Risk Committee meeting. Now, the Mayor and I were just debating, do we actually open with the prayer? And I think last time you opened with the karakia. Karakia. So would you like to do the same, please? Thank you.
Ko ranganui ki ronga, ko papatunga ki pirara, ko tātai ta ira tangata, ki wanganui ti hei mario. Sky Father above, Mother Earth below, all of us in the middle, breath of life.
Right. I think we've got an apology from Councillor Chase. Can I have a mover, please? Thank you, Councillor Carey. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Peter. All those in favour, please say aye. Public forum? No public forum. Any items not on the agenda, Mr. Chief Executive? No. Right, next item is our declaration of conflicts of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest that need to be declared? There are none. Confirmation of our minutes held 27th of August. Can I have a mover? Councillor Peter, seconded Councillor Steve. Any discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Is carried. Our first report is our Audit New Zealand recommendations on the draft management letter. I think. Thank you, Sarah. We'll take your report as read. Is there any highlights you want to bring? Further information?
Thank you, Chair Philip. Morning, everyone. Just wanted to say it's a really great report we've received from our LTP. The two recommendations that they've made, we're already planning for within the LTP. But as Philip suggested, I'll take it as read, and if there's any questions.
Councillor Scott and then Councillor Sharon, thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Sarah. I did want to just have a quick chat. It jumped out, I think it was on page 14, but mainly page 16 of our papers. It talked about how council's decisions evolved over time with the LTP and lists in there things that council decided to do. I was a little bit confused as to some of that language where council, my recollection of it, council, as much as I wanted us to, council never changed its decision. We originally agreed on one process, and that was the process that we landed on. So I can see there that there could be extra expenses, but also audit is all about using quite precise language. 1.4 in particular talks about changing council decisions, and I don't think that this council actually changed their decision at all. So I'm just wondering if I'm correct in that, or...
Yeah, thanks.
Through you, Chair Philip. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Councillor Scott, there was no formal decision to change anything. There was a paper that obviously came that actually management changed in the last minute to request that it was deferred to 12 months for the LTP. However, that decision wasn't actually made, so it was always going forward as a LTP. The only decision was to then delay it by a month.
Mr. Chair, actually, can I just so just clarify before you ask your question? I just want to clarify with Sarah. This is a draft report, so what we can then request is any corrections over fact, and what I am hearing from you, Councillor, is you like that paragraph, and what the Chief Executive has actually said is we didn't actually make a formal decision.
Yes, and then...
And now you can carry, yep.
Thank you. Yep, absolutely, Mr. Chair. Thank you. And then having a look in the bottom of the third paragraph, there's reference to auditors planning to seek reimbursement for the additional costs incurred. So 2 really quick questions on that. Do we have an indication of what those costs might be? And I suppose, are those costs justified in light of what we've just talked about?
Thank you, Councillor Gilmore. Through you, Chair Phillip, we have not had any indication from Audit New Zealand around what these costs might be, what that would look like. I think we've articulated before around where Audit have made such comments that it's a process that we'll go through. It will be Raj, Brian, it will sit with the Audit Director. This Audit Director would be Debbie. We would have the robust conversations around what those costs are and what that would look like. Once that's known, we would come back to council.
I also just, in terms of the process, the final fee has to be agreed by the Office of the Auditor General as well. So while we have that initial discussion, before any final decision can be made, it's got to be approved by the Office of the Auditor General. Right? I have seen some horrendously large variations, which the council is pushing significantly back on. And this is another council, right? And I think I'm confused as to they need to specify exactly what the issue was. Right? In my opinion, too, is, and I'm not sure if it's within this case, Sarah, right? Is I saw some very baby auditors, right? In my experience, and the baby auditors, we were teaching them. But of course, we weren't allowed any leeway to make a mistake either. So it's sort of, right? So there needs to be a very robust process. Mayor Tracy, did you want to make a comment?
Just, I would appreciate being involved in those conversations because it's something that continually I've talked to Audit around over the past few years around that value for money. And I'm just a little bit concerned if it's just the Chief Executive and Raj in that room. It'd be good to be able to have that wider conversation with them.
I was just going to say I've also been involved in some discussions over fees as well in previous councils over, not over the LTP yet, but certainly over last year's annual report fees as well.
Then I'm quite happy for you to be in that room. I think that they need some robust challenge around this because I am really, really concerned at some of the figures that they might be talking about. So more than happy that Phillip is there.
Through you, Chair. I have no problem with that, but rest assured, I will also be giving them robust discussions on this. Certainly also the amount of time that staff has had to spend with them, I think unnecessarily as well, and the delays that they've actually pushed this out also. But yep, happy with your attendance. But yep, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Sharon, we haven't forgotten you.
Apologies needed, Chair. Thank you. Councillor Scott covered off one of my queries, but can I just back us up to 1.2 in this draft report? And I might have perhaps, and I apologise, being in a slightly cynical mood when I got to this, is that the LTP is free from material misstatements. And I've put a question there, really. And I guess I'm asking what constitutes a misstatement, because further on in this meeting, there are a couple of papers where we learn about some stuff that may have some significant impact on the accuracy of our LTP. So I guess I'm asking what constitutes a misstatement at this stage, and if while this is still draft, we've uncovered and can and need to be changing some of the financial figures in our LTP. Is this correct in 1.2? So my question is, what's a misstatement? And if stuff's uncovered while you're still in a draft phase of this report, what work will be required to correct the information?
I'll tackle the easy question if everyone's okay with that, and then I'll leave it to my colleague beside me now, my GM. What constitute a misstatement? So I think further in the report, we've detailed all the misstatements. So these are all types of misstatements. These are all things that they have found within their work that we've had a discussion around, we've rectified, and gone from there. But with regards to your second half of your question, Raj.
Yes, Chair. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, councillors. If you recall, one of the key elements of an LTP is we make a whole stream of assumptions. And the LTP is based on what the auditors call best assumptions based on available information to us at the time. So, and it's at a point in time. So what happens is that once LTP is adopted, there are cases where very quickly things happen in council where the budgets may not correctly reflect the annual plan itself. So looking at year one budgets. So an example that you raise, councillor, is maybe the insurance. Exactly. So at the time when we are doing the budgets, that is the most available information that we have. So we base our budgets on that information. And when that information during the year changes, and that's when you go through a process of a variation to the budget. So there is a change in the budgets. If let's say year 2 and year 3 changes, that's your annual plan process that you bring in and revisit that. So there is most often in most councils where just after you adopt an LTP, even annual plan process, there would be changes in your budget.
It's covered off.
That's covered off. And I think what's important for us is then, I think you've alluded to, is we have to take stock as to how that variance would need to be funded and whether it's funded during the year, or if, let's say, we need to then look to see how we fund that over multiple years, meaning that you reflect that cost overrun or the increase in the subsequent AP and recover that funding.
That's a snapshot in time.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, I've got some. Don't worry. Don't pick up your bags just yet, Sarah.
Oh,
Sorry?
another report.
No. So on page 19, para 2.13, the audit makes a very interesting comment about sources of funding for replacement of significant assets. And the question I have for you is, do you agree with their statement that depreciation should be used for all replacement of all significant assets? Because here they're saying if there's a risk that there's insufficient funds should an asset fail earlier than anticipated. Well, there is no way, right? Depreciation is supposed to be, is spreading the cost of that asset over its useful life. If its useful life is shorter, then obviously you're going to have a shortfall. So why are they saying is depreciation is actually has to be used for the replacement of asset? And that's my beef with audit, because I think they're actually fixated on that, whereas depreciation is allocating the cost of that asset over its useful life. It's not necessarily going to replace the like with like, which then comes down to the bit that I want to draw council's attention to. Well, first of all, you can answer that question if you like, Sarah, or you can plead the fifth.
Thank you, Chair Phillip. Depreciation, as you've mentioned, is funding, is dividing the cost over the life of the asset. But in those situations, you don't necessarily have the funds available, and that's where your internal loans and your balance sheet as a whole gets taken into consideration. So while, yes, an element of our renewal should be funded by depreciation, and we do try to fund all renewals by depreciation, the Dannevirke impounded supply would be the perfect case and example where there is insufficient renewals budgeted because the life of that has been shortened significantly. So that has been loan funded. So yes, I probably more lean to agreeing with what you have said, Chair Phillip. Raj, did you?
Yeah, Sarah touched on it. The other thing we looked at depreciation funding, we pull it. So a particular asset may now have accumulated sufficient depreciation, but we look at the asset class. If not the asset class, we look at the activity. If not the activity, we look at the whole of the balance sheet. If all of that we say that we don't have sufficient depreciation, exactly what Sarah said, then we use loan funding. Our revenue financing policy allows us to do that as a second priority. A first priority to replace renewal assets in depreciation funding. Insufficient depreciation funding, then you draw on the loan.
And that actually leads very nicely into my second question, which is actually the bottom of that that section. That the council has very little headroom, which is surplus of capacity to raise any future debt in years 4, 5, and 6. The question, as they're saying, is that's because we're currently not credit rated. That's the rationale for that. So the question for you, Raj, not Sarah, right, is how quickly are we going to get credit rated?
Through your chair, we have started our discussions with PwC advisors on the process to get credit rated. And I think our intention is during this financial year, year 2, correct me, thank you, Sarah. By year 2, before we hit that issue in years 4, that we are credit rated. That's the intention.
I'll watch progress with great interest because I think that's critical. Right. Any further? My last question, right? Sorry to dominate it, right? Is actually on the impounded supply on page 28. They make some very interesting comments there. Now, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is the LTP reflected sufficient alternatives without needing to actually spend a whole lot of money if we actually had to abandon temporarily the impounded supply. Am I wrong or am I right on that one? Or do we need to do some more work on that one?
Thank you, Chair Philip. There is budget available for what we are resilience building, I think is the way we were talking and labeling this project. Hamish or Raj might have more information than what I do, but yes, you're correct. There is 8 million, I think, off the top of my head, maybe 7.9 over years 1 and 2 for that resilience building without a repair. And then the repair work, depending on what that looked like, would come back or would be a consultation item.
Chair Philip, yeah, pretty well summarised by Sarah. So the decision has effectively been made to delay the repairs to the impounded supply and build resilience around it, and then at another time in the future to actually fully understand what those repairs to the impounded supply would mean, pretty much ending it and removing the liner to actually see the extent of the damage. So the decision will be made by council in the future, and it may be not even to repair it at all, depending on how the resilience in it that gets built around it.
Councillor Sharon?
Thanks, Chair, but you jumped ahead, so I thought I'd better back up the bus a bit. It's all good. No. I just didn't want to miss out on page 25 of ours, Sarah and Raj. There is the recommendation that council progress its improvement plan actions by dedicating resources, blah, blah, blah. Management comments, I've just got XXX. Question mark. And similarly down towards the bottom of that page, management comments, XXX. What's going to go in there?
Great question. My apologies. I had issues with loading my report onto the agenda. The management comments that were meant to be included in the report, which I've obviously uploaded the wrong version, was that these were being incorporated. These were already budgeted for as part of the better off reallocation of funding and within the long-term plan. So both recommendations are covered within the long-term plan budgets.
If I can, through your chair, on page 10 of the report, Sarah's report, under para 6 key recommendations, Sarah does talk about the 2 issues and what's management's.
Right, I figured that would cover it all, but apologies. Yeah, that's all good.
Poor Ellie had to hunt me down in an interview.
Okay,
Thank you for that.
thank you. Councillor Carey?
Thanks, Chair. a couple of things I have in mind being touched on by Sharon as well. But just that same recommendation there, where we were just talking about it, a couple of things there, they talk about the 2131 and made comments which I thought were handling okay. Just the criticality of assets, just several assets are beyond the. Just wondering what we're going to say about what the auditors were trying to say about several assets. What was that? What's going to finish that phrase there, Sarah? That's one thing, and then of course the comments, but had another comment. Yeah.
Page number.
Oh, sorry, it's that's the page 25.
And it's carried microphone.
Yeah, yes.
Page 25, thanks, Sarah. That recommendation thing, recommendation paragraph, but it was just several assets are beyond their technical useful. Are they assuming the life? Is that the life of those assets?
It's a third bullet point in that box.
Yeah, through your chair. In the asset management plans or the data that the team provide to the auditors, they have the asset and what we call is the technical. That means if you put a valve in place, the technical useful life of the valve is 10 years. However, you may have a valve that's still in use after 12 years. Yeah, so I think that's what the auditors are saying in a sense that the several asset has gone beyond the useful lives. So what they would like us to see, they haven't elaborated here whether we do what you call a performance and condition, especially a condition assessment. So even though it has gone beyond its technical useful life, it's still in good condition. There's no reason why the engineers or the team would replace those assets. So in that case, then what we tend to do in the system is to extend the useful lives. So when you do the valuation, instead of saying that the asset value is 0, we would say the asset now has got another life of 4 years or 5 years. So we extend the useful life. The technical useful life will still remain the same. That's the specification technical specs, but our remaining useful life would change. So there may be instances where technical useful life for that pipe could be 100 years, but our useful life is 110 years because the pipe's condition is still in good condition. So there's no reason for us to replace those.
Yep, I've sort of got that. Yep, that's it. It was more around, and I was just echoing the concerns of some of the councillors and Brian, perhaps about the auditors have made a lot of comment about how it's going to cost more money. But it was just the content 3.1, which is about the content of the consultation. I know a lot about what they had to do. We were pushing into an unaudited CD. And I did bring this up actually at one of two of our meetings, and I made the comment, just what do we need them to do? We're going to go for unaudited, and that's our problem. That the comment was made by management, well, it's better if they do get involved. I think this is possibly an area where their meter will be ticking a little bit, because they do go on, do the changes, etc., unable, and you should have done it. We said we weren't going to do it like half the councils in New Zealand, and we went on. Now, to me, this is the arguable area for costs, perhaps, but they've made a lot of emphasis in this area, and I just really, to me, I was just squirming about it too. But that's just a comment, not probably an answer. But
I dare not justify Audit New Zealand's comments or their decisions, right? My understanding of their responsibilities in the unaudited consultation document was that the risk for council is if we had a consultation document that didn't meet the statutory requirements, that potentially could invalidate the LTP and its decision making. So while they weren't asked to audit the CD, they had an obligation in terms of the adoption of the LTP that the CD was of a suitable standard to meet the legislative requirements. Now, how much work they needed to undertake for that is very much up for debate. I had, and this is because I do a number of these, I had one council where there was pressure from, I've got to be careful what I say here because it hasn't been made public, certain persons that the CD wasn't legally compliant. However, and that council obtained a legal opinion quite quickly to say it was legally compliant. So I'm not quite sure how, and that legal opinion was probably less than the audit fees. So I'm not quite sure to what degree, right, the auditors need to go down, right? I found that, so that's an interesting debate we're yet to have with that particular fee. But yes, so that's just under putting some context about why they needed to do it. I'm not just trying to justify them. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just add to that? We as officers actually asked the auditors to complete that review because we didn't want to get to an adoption of an LTP and fall at the final hurdle. You all are aware of how much goes into an LTP, so it was just good management for us to make sure that the CD was compliant and wasn't going to become an issue later on.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? So we go right back to page 9, I think. We've got a couple of recommendations there. My only question on the recommendations is, and this is probably a question for both Sarah, Raj and Stephen, are we actually going to monitor these recommendations as part of our ongoing thank yous? Right, if that's business as usual. Okay, in that case, do I have a mover for the 2 recommendations? Mayor Tracy, do I have a second? Councillor Peter, all those in favour, please say aye. That is carried, thank you. Next item 7.2, page 39.
Thank you, Chair Phillip. I'll take the report as read. It outlines our audit plan for the 2024 annual report, which is commenced this week. Is there any questions? Might be the better way rather than me go through it.
Thank you. Any questions? Wow, no questions. I've got 2 for you, Sarah. Right. So I notice they're starting today. Have they rocked up yet?
They are working remotely this week and will be on site Tuesday.
The next question I have is on page 47. We'll talk about one. Sorry, page 47. Oh, right.
Chief, I'm trying to keep up with you. On page 44, then, there are the risks and the issue. It's the very first bullet point is around the valuations of infrastructure assets held at fair value. Given what has been uncovered, I've put, because one of the bullet points is about reviewing the reasonableness of the data and the key assumptions. So I've marked that as, so what will they find based on what we're going to talk about soon? Will they find the fact that we've valued our stuff below ground versus above? I mean, is that some of the stuff they're going to find?
Through you, Chair Phillip, the valuation, the above ground, below ground doesn't change the valuation. The asset is still valued what it is valued based on its units, rates, and its useful life remaining.
Right.
We have done, I think we chatted about this last Audit and Risk Committee meeting. We have done a lot of work internally around the revaluations because they seem to be our problem child in the dying hours of us needing to get an adoption over the line. So we've done significant work in this space. The unit rates have all been calculated based off what the cost to council was at 30 June, which is the date in which the valuation is being prepared at. We've done a review over this external valuation and we are comfortable with where it lies. We are waiting audit to pick this piece of work up. I imagine they'll pick it up next week when they're on site because they do like to do a walkthrough and have a discussion in that space.
And I have a further question, not around that one, but I'm not sure where you're going to go to. So I thought
My question is on page 47 on impairment, right, which actually then ties in with comment from Sarah on the revaluation. My experience with revaluations last year was that they almost wanted to redo the revaluation. So I'm a little bit surprised with audit. They're not actually looking at it till next week. And my experience with audit is they do spend a humongous amount of time on the revaluation, and that revaluation has been done by a professional body who's experienced in revaluations, and they believe that they can find errors in the revaluation. All right, so I just sort of caution that. Right? The other issue I'll raise it. Are you satisfied with how you've considered the impairment of the Dannyberg impounded supply? Because I know impairment is a difficult and very subjective calculation, and audit like to get there. Do a significant deep dive into that. And I've got Councillor Steve. Then if you answer that question, then I've got Councillor, then unless it's associated with the same question.
Well, mine isn't. I'm on page 15.
So I'm on that page 45, because that's, how does that work? It states the district council revalues its land and buildings every 3 years. That's pretty plain to understand. And then it goes on to say its land and buildings assets were last revalued in 30th of June 23. So how does that contradict? And then now they're going to get a fair value assessment was needed to be performed in 24. Well, 23 and 24 ain't 3.
Yeah, I'll let you explain.
Thank you for your question. So we do complete a full revaluation of our land and building every 3 years, which is what they're saying. However, every year we need to do a fair value assessment to ensure what we're saying the value of our books, our land and building is on the books, is true and fair representation of what those assets are at 30 June. So we've got an external fair value assessment being conducted on our land and buildings. Should it come back to say that it's a significant increase in value, then we would need to go down a valuation path. But we're quite comfortable with where we are.
That is just, no, sorry, can I don't know, it's probably constitutionally right, we've got to do it this way, but this is where all the money's going. It's crazy. And I think it's 365 days later. And someone is getting, that's a good job, man. That is a good wicket to be on. You know, the definition, I see the difference now. One says fair value and the other one says actually revalue. And ching, 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 guess who's paying? The ratepayer.
Mm-hmm.
I provide context to three processes, the auditors that we go through every year. Valuation. So we are required to look into a process of how we value our asset. Land and buildings, we do every 3 years. Infrastructure assets, we do every year. That's a decision in accounting policy, is what we do. Then there's 2 other processes we have to do. It's called a fair value assessment. That means that every year, balance sheet day, we need to look at our assets and say, do they correctly reflect the fair value at that 30th of June? For infrastructure assets, okay, because we do valuation every year, 30th of June. For land and buildings, because we do that every 3 years, they're asking us to do it. This is what the standard requires. So they're following the standards what required. The standard also require, which is what the chair alluded to, which is what they call impairment assessment. So every 30th of June, we need to look at our assets and assess whether are those assets impaired. An example chair talked about was impounded supply. The others is eroding infrastructure. There was damage. So at a 30th of June, are we doing any impairment? So this is the 3 process: evaluation, which is what we do according to accounting policy. Then every year, 30th of June, we need to do 2 exercises: fair value assessment of our assets in our balance sheet, and are those assets in balance sheet impaired? So these are the 2 assessments that we have to do every year, as required by the standards. so that our balance sheet correctly reflects the value of the assets.
I make a political statement. Right? In my opinion, the accounting standards are designed now for public listed companies where fair value is absolutely critical. The problem we have as councils is, so what if our assets aren't 100% fair valued, right? Yes, I'm like, they need to be valued, but you know, what's the consequences of actually not doing a robust? But as Raj has already said, it's the accounting and auditing standards require this work to be done. That's my beef, right? Is we now seem to be, this government is determined to cut costs. If this government is, this is what's a political statement, is serious about reducing the costs for the public sector, reducing the accounting standards for public benefit entities needs to be seriously looked at. And on a personal note, I have already raised this with the Deputy Auditor General, and I will raised it with him in August, and he hasn't got back to me, so I will follow it up again. Okay, so to me, that's right. I totally agree. Right, originally, right, 20 years ago, I could do same accounting standard principles. The principles haven't changed. I could do a fair value assessment myself based on what, providing I got appropriate unit rates, which could be validated. Now it requires a professional to do that fair value. So auditors can actually then critique it and spend a whole lot of time critiquing it for, as you rightly say, for what value, right? So it's a cha-ching on our ratepayer. Thank you. Any further questions on the audit plan? I think Councillor Sharon, did you have one further on page 50?
Page 50, Chair Philip.
Thank you.
And I guess it's
Thinking of the future around the group audit, it defines there what the group comprises. My question is, will the Paetoa pool, if it goes ahead, be included in here once Raj's eyebrows going, yes or no?
My understanding is that my understanding prior to a pool, once the pool is completed, it would be vested back into council, so it would be council's operations.
okay.
So it's into tax. We were surprised to see the tax item crop back up again. I have chatted to my good friend who I share an office with in legal counsel, and we're going to revisit this at our end. So just, it is on our agenda.
Yeah, I thought it had been dealt with, so thank you.
So
Yes, no, Sarah is correct. So the structures are different. The Tara Aquatic Trust is, we are the settler, we established a trust and they are managing the asset. Whereas for the Bush Aquatic Trust is council is ownership of the assets and running the operation. So there's no governance structure apart from a management, apart from a service level agreement in place. So I don't think they should not be asking us to do a group for the swimming pool. But they will still be asked. So they put it in here because we are in disagreement. We think that we don't have control over the trust, Tara Aquatic Trust, whereas auditors seem to think they are, and this is where we need to resolve this issue.
Yeah, I've seen some bizarre decisions by OAG over control over public trusts where the council has no direct control nor direct funding. They do contribute to it, but they've deemed it a control, and they have tagged the council accordingly. Councillor Scott, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Chair Philip. It's more of a wider question. I think we've kind of gone through the questions on the paper, and this audit plan is for 23-24. Obviously, we're going to start having to think about what our next audit's going to be. So I suppose as a wider question, my understanding is that there are two main audit providers for councils, or that councils utilise. Will we be engaging with both of them to ensure that we are getting fair value? We understand what the costs are and the effectiveness of the process. So, sorry, guys. But yeah, just wanted to see what that might look like, and that might be particularly of interest once the investigation for the direct debit issue has come up, of what should have been picked up, what perhaps shouldn't have been. So I'd just like to have some confidence that those discussions, or to understand whether those discussions will be had.
You want to pass to me, Raj, because I'm having this debate elsewhere. So unfortunately, Councillor Scott, the Auditor General appoints the auditor, not council. All we get to do is have the privilege of actually trying to negotiate the fee and the approach, right? However, if we're unsatisfied with the auditor, then we actually then have to engage directly with the Auditor General.
Future meeting, perhaps.
Totally, that's what I was, yep. And be careful what you wish for, right? That's all I'll say. Right, anything further on item 7.2, our Audit New Zealand plan? We go back. I need a better system to put the resolution in. So we've got a recommendation there. Do I, on page 39, do I have a mover? Happy to move it. Councillor Steve seconded. I wasn't sure whether it was which, ladies, all right. Councillor Sharon, all those, any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Next item is 7.3, update on the direct debit issue. I think Rebecca, you're in the hot seat. Thank you, Rebecca.
Okay, good to see you this morning. Thank you.
So once again, here to update you on the direct debit issue, where we're up to with that. I will take most of the report as read, but I would like to discuss section 6 with you. Before that, I thought I'd just give you a really quick update on where we're at with the project. So over the last week, there's been a huge push to get all the recalculations done that were required for the people, for the impacted households, so that their direct debits that are going out in this next round, starting Sunday, are updated, and that they are happy with what their new direct debits are. So that's been a massive effort over the last week. So there's a batch of direct debits that go out Sunday, today, tomorrow, and the next day, and then there's another batch that go out on the 29th to the 30th. So right currently, as I speak, the batch that are going out on the 29th and 30th are being processed, but that big batch of this 4-day batch that we're in at the moment were done over the last week, and 200 odd manual recalculations were done. So once we get through this second smaller batch, we will have essentially kind of broken the back of the project. We will have we'll have a plan in place for most of the impacted households. Some we're still working with. Many have requested the postponement option, and there's a few that we still need to actually make contact with. So we've really made a big jump in our progress in the last week, and we can start to shift our attention now towards working with the individuals who are still a work in progress. In terms of the investigation that is into the process and the systems and what happened there to cause the project, the issue, we have Ross Franklin, who has been brought in and has begun the investigation, and that is underway. So he will be working towards bringing something back to you at a future date. So turning to section 6. The purpose of our report today is to bring our challenges and concerns to you as the Audit and Risk Committee concerns around the project. So the first one that I've outlined is resourcing. So you'll be aware that this project has been massively resource intensive and that staff are working on this on top of their BAU. So it has been a massive project, and it has been, while council has brought in myself and Kylie to help with the comms. And we've also utilised the PNCC call centre for help with managing the calls. It has been a huge load, additional load on staff and a few key staff in particular. So the team and the exec team are really mindful of that, monitoring that carefully and doing what we can to support those who are whose already big BAU load has increased with this project. But like I said, having kind of gotten over the first big hump, we're now starting to kind of move into a sustained phase. And so hopefully there'll still be pressure, but that really intense pressure will begin to ease. 6.2, potential legal challenge. There's not really much more to say there. We haven't heard anything since the writing of this report. We're just conscious that there are people out there who are seeking legal advice. 6.3, in terms of the Lagoima request, again, that's really, there's not much more to say there unless there are any questions around that. As we understood it, that the Tararua community law was seeking to put in a submission to the policy, but apparently they didn't. So not sure if the information provided answered their questions or what, but anyway. 6.4, increased scope of the direct debit error. So with this one, Councillor Gilmore sent through some questions late last week, and so we have had some answers that we that directly address the questions that Councillor Gilmore has raised, and so I'll work my way through those, and then we'll take questions at the end. So as mentioned in the report, we had identified that there might be a wider issue with the number of impacted households, and we've started investigating that. One of the questions from Councillor Gilmore was, why was a sample check not completed on the other direct debit records in the initial investigation? So our initial investigation was focused on identifying further cases like those few cases that were initially brought to our attention. So those that required manual recalculation of their direct debit every year once the rebate was applied. Once we had identified that 602 households, we made the call that we must notify the impacted groups with urgency in order to resolve as many of the cases as possible before the second rates instalment at the beginning of November. This was so that those who owed council money didn't fall further behind during the second rates instalment period, keeping in mind that those who received the rebate specifically were the most vulnerable in our community. So to meet that deadline, we had to have all the required recalculations done in the third week of October, which is the process that I was just talking about before. This urgent response has been described as the acute phase of the project. All of our focus and resourcing went into finding individual solutions for each impacted household during that phase. During the acute phase, we did a sample check of other direct debit accounts to make sure we had identified all impacted accounts. It was during this sample checking that we identified other households who were potentially impacted by the similar issue, faulty process for recalculating direct debits on an annual basis. The second question from Councillor Gilmore, when will we know how many people are likely to be impacted? There's not an easy answer to this question. Because of the complexity of the rating system, it is very difficult to categorically identify every anomaly in an efficient way. Each case needs to be reviewed individually and an assessment done on a case-by-case basis. We are still working to identify who is impacted in this additional group. It requires the involvement of several different specialist staff to come up with an accurate list. It has been challenging finding the time to make this happen, given the resourcing pressures we've been managing in the last 6 weeks, and it is currently a work in progress. But now that we are through the acute phase, it is a priority, that investigation. When will we know an estimate of the amounts involved? What we know so far is that we believe that we're looking at a much smaller additional group, and each of whom will need to be, as I said, investigated on a case-by-case basis. As soon as we've a comprehensive list of those additional impacted households, we will know the amounts involved. But we don't have a specific time frame as yet. Is it likely that we will need to enter a new acute stage to deal with these? No. We expect there will be a small number of additional cases, and we've now got an established process for dealing with them. So we are confident that we will be able to work through with each additional household to resolve both their balance brought forward and their current direct debit arrangements quickly within a few days. What are the other issues with our rates debtor management noted in 6.4.4? So as part of our ongoing investigation, or Ross's investigation into the error, we've provided the following examples to Ross. Where we have assisted the customer to set up a payment plan, we've assisted the customer to set up a payment plan and then not followed up on it when it became apparent that they were not keeping up with it. Another example is where some ratepayers have missed some payments, and that has put them further behind, and we have not proactively followed up in these cases. The investigation has already identified several opportunities for improvement and for us to revisit our debt management process. So we, in terms of the question, what are the other issues? We are relying on Ross to bring that to light. Question 6, further clarification on 6.4. It appears to read that some people on payment plans and direct debits may have also been impacted. Do we have examples of new people impacted that are not and have not received a rates rebate? This is correct. Our investigation has identified that some people on payment plans and who pay their rates by direct debit are impacted, and the examples I gave above. So where they've not kept up with their payment plan and have fallen further into arrears, or some people have missed the odd payment. But we believe it is a small number of households who fall into this from what we have observed so far. So in terms of the impact on the rates postponement policy, since the policy is has been set up specifically for this issue, the policy as drafted will cover the ratepayers in this additional group. The stated purpose and intent of the policy is to provide a remedy for those impacted ratepayers to reduce potential financial hardship directly caused by council's error. The focus on those who have been impacted by council's error may include those who have or have not received a rates rebate. The reference to ratepayers who are typically in receipt of rates rebates does not include or does not exclude those who have not received a rates rebate. Does that make sense?
No.
Just repeat it slowly again.
Okay. The purpose of the policy, so that's where the focus is to provide a remedy for those impacted ratepayers to reduce potential financial hardship that has been directly caused by council. Right, that's the intent of the policy, to provide a remedy to the issue that has been directly caused by council's error. So that focus is on those who have been impacted by council's error, and that may include people who have received the rebate, or it may include people who have not received the rebate, right? In the criteria down below in the policy, there's a reference to ratepayers who are typically in receipt of rates rebates. So that statement, being typically in receipt, doesn't exclude people who have not received the rates rebate.
That's late. We didn't need advice.
So these other ones are delinquents, really, delinquent ratepayers.
Not necessarily, no. There's a multitude of reasons, I guess, why people don't necessarily make all their payments, and that's what adds to the complexity of identifying them, because every person has a different set of circumstances leading up to why they're in that situation. So, yeah.
Just at a point that, you know, when we first become aware of this myself, right up to, I even believe some of the mayor and other councils, that was all rates rebate group. So there was no reason for us to believe at that point around the initial investigation that Peter done to get the data that there would be another subgroup. We did discover this when there were the checks done as part of getting the information of who was impacted by that. So there was no evidence to say, yes, there's another group at that point, but it was discovered by staff working on the project as they did review a number of, doing spot checks and internal auditing.
Councillor Stephen will come back to.
Yeah, just while I'm looking at this menagerie of your, I'm just trying to get my lens cleared, because there's two issues here. One is an error, right? And funnily, the error is caused by trying to help somebody out by getting a rebate. We've ended up here. But the second one, as soon as somebody's in default of a contract, like if you go and get an automatic payment at Harvey Norman or anything, doesn't have to be a certain company, you're in default. So the contract's void. There's no way that you can have special circumstances, as much as I feel for these people, but they're in void of the contract. You can't just keep, oh, well, now we'll go. You imagine how much time this council's going to be involved in going around and checking every individual ratepayer that doesn't do what 94% of the ratepayers do. No, I'm not talking about the mistake. I'm talking about the person that doesn't fulfill their contractual agreement. They were mentioned there before. She doesn't. You mentioned about somebody not paying.
Chief Executive, respond.
Thank you, Chair Philip. It's probably quite a good question, but there's another element to this. So yes, they've defaulted through whatever reason that's been the cause. It could be they've swapped banks or couldn't afford it or whatever. They've then come into council and they've renewed that contract that you've talked about by then entering into a payment plan to pay the outstanding amount and the current debt. And the current direct debit. So the contract has started again to pay the arrears, and then they've continued to meet those obligations, but the rates have still either gone, or they've paid the arrears and that the direct debit hasn't stopped, or they've had a new direct debit, rates have gone up and it didn't match. And this is where I'm thinking from our perspective, and from my perspective, the rates rebate is, 100% our fault. This next group, I don't think, is quite in the same boat as the rates rebate, because they've entered an agreement to pay back through the direct debit system through a fault of their own, but they've redone the contract again, so to pay back what they owe. So hopefully the amounts are obviously going to be way less as well.
This is the complexity we're talking about. So in some scenarios, there are arrears that are rates owing because they haven't been paid by the person. Where there could have been some manual adjustment that could have helped them with that process. So we set a direct debit and then it perhaps wasn't changed in future years. We have contributed to that. So we're trying to understand how we have contributed to that and what amounts we need to look at. And that's why it's not as clear for us that there's, 400, I'm not going to say numbers actually, it's smaller than that. It's not clear how many people are impacted because we need to do the analysis to see whether those people are in arrears because they haven't paid or they're in arrears because the direct debit amounts that we adjusted or didn't adjust weren't right.
Just to add to that, this has also been a complexity for the rates rebate, because there have been people in that group have also defaulted. So even though we've caused an element of this, they've also missed payments as well. So you've got to balance what is our doing, what is their doing. And this group, and maybe I didn't explain it as good as I could have, has an element of both as well, which we've contributed to, but at what level. And that's why it has to be a case-by-case basis to work out almost a tailored solution for each individual. So it is definitely, in my view, a lower risk group than the
Councillor Scott, and got Councillor the Mayor. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. With your indulgence, can I ask a couple of questions?
I think,
Stop me where you want me to, but sorry.
yeah, can I just, I think just before we ask these questions, right, I think it'd be useful, right? Unfortunately, I'm not quite in daily contact with Ross Franklin, right? Ross and I have worked on a number of projects, and I recommended Ross be appointed because I thought he had the appropriate, right, ferret skills, right, to get to the bottom of the issue, right. Maybe the chief executive might just want to comment as to where you think Ross is up to, because I think that's right, and what the process is, because we've talked about Ross's work, right, but we actually haven't had an update from Ross, right. Does that help?
Because I've got some questions that I'm quite keen to run through.
Okay, all right. At the end, okay, just trying to get all the information out. So carry on, Councillor.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, before I kind of kick into a couple of questions, I just did want to touch on 6.1.3 in particular in my sort of capacity as governance, health and safety champion. So what I just want to get an assurance when we're looking at the significant toll on the well-being of several key staff, I just want to get an absolute assurance that we are doing everything, that we need to be doing to make sure that these staff are supported and protected.
Like I say, we as a team and as an exec, it's constantly being monitored and discussed. Like the whole issue that we're dealing with, it's a complex it's a complex issue to try and just simply put things in place to protect their well-being. But we are doing what we can to support those key staff and ensure that they know that they're well supported, and if they need any further support, to come and to seek it from the appropriate places.
Thank you for that. I think it is just important that we get that assurance. I just want, and I only have a couple more questions because you've obviously answered all of mine, so thank you for doing that. I just want to get a little bit of clarity though, because we've sort of talked a little bit around this new smaller subgroup, and I just want to understand it a little bit better because I'm hearing some different things as it's been explained. So within this group, could it potentially include every single person on a direct debit who has been on a bespoke payment plan with council? So could it potentially, if say someone's got behind and we've said as council, okay, Mr. or Mrs. Ratepayer, we're going to put you on a direct debit. You're not going to be charged any penalties or anything like that, or any interest. And then we have a rates increase and we haven't adjusted it. We've had a rates increase and then we haven't adjusted it. So potentially someone who has been in arrears have done the right thing by going on a direct debit, and over time we have got them further into arrears. Is that potentially, is it every one of those could be impacted? I just want to double check.
So no, it won't be. Certainly team has dealt with a number of people, like it's not that our rates team haven't done anything. So there has been, largely they have, but there is a certain percentage, and I'm sort of looking at Steve and he might be able to clarify this because he's done a lot of work behind the scenes regarding this. Are you able to, through the chair?
It's standing very good. What I can say is that in the sample I investigated, which was around 40 ratepayers that are on a direct debit and on a payment plan, not all of that sample were impacted. So I can definitely say it will not be. It's not 100% of them. That's it's good news. And then if I could just ask my final question.
Sorry.
No, I was just saying it's not a huge group.
Okay.
It falls into this anyway, not talking like 800-900 people are on payment plans. It's a lot limited to that.
Oh no, and that's I suppose that's what I'm trying to ascertain, because I think in fairness we received at the same time as public, we received a public document which was, to be fair, fairly light on details. So we need to kind of use this meeting to try and understand what has been happening. So that's why I'm asking for some clarity on those numbers. I was going to ask about the further questions about the sample checking. I am disappointed we didn't do that at the time, but I think I will leave that to the investigator to be giving their viewpoint on whether that needed to be done or whether it should be done. So my final question is on the rates remission policy. Completely understand that the wording, sorry, that you used, and I did have the rates remission policy up. I think typically in receipt. It is very clear in my reading of it that this policy has been designed for a particular cohort of people. That has been sort of the intention, that it has been used for these people. So I do, again, just want an assurance if this is extended to anyone else outside of that original group of people that we thought about, that one, we're notified, that we know about it as councillors, but that we have very, very sound legal advice that it can be used for that. So I just want that assurance. I got a nod.
Through you, Chair. Yes, absolutely. I think it has been the same lawyer throughout the process that's supported the development of that policy as well. And we have other lawyers that are like this is their expertise in this field. So I think probably the best in the country.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Sharon, Tracy.
Sorry, Alison, sorry. You got it.
I'll be quick. I'll just have three things. Two issues for me. Obviously, I'm extremely disappointed that this has been uncovered. Certainly feel for the team, but certainly feel for our community as well. The comms to us to find this buried deep within a public document and not be aware of it. Keyboard warriors would have had a field day with this. The other point I want to make is when you say manual recalculation at the moment, my heart sinks. When will manual turn into a computerized system?
So first of all, the teams, as we've mentioned before, doing some massive hours on this, and I personally think the reporting throughout this process does take a lot of effort to do. We've reported it through this report to give you a heads up, because this is probably the first opportunity we had to do it, and the teams worked over the last 3 days answering further questions from Scott as well. And we do not have an abundance of resources that are working on this that can report. I the information does get fed up through us, but the reality is that this is the place to report these type of findings, in my view. So we're going to have about 3 layers of reporting that staff will have to do all the time.
Not at this, sorry, not at this level. And some of the questions that I've written down is that we identified very early that this was huge reputational risk. We have a policy of no surprises with us within the council. We wanted to build trust and confidence back up, both with our residents, but actually this matter had to be reported through the Department of Internal Affairs and to the Minister. So I'm going to go back and check those briefings, because at the first sight, of anything wider, and I know because actually I sent one of those queries through around direct debits, they needed to be kept informed. There's a letter drafted to go to update the Minister that actually isn't accurate because of this. So we do need to highlight some of that. So this for me, it shouldn't come through a public paper like this to councillors, and I would like to understand it a bit more. But I also like Ross to run a sample check over that, because we had this matter looked at by a team member, and actually I would have thought that would have been quite a curious thing to do, would have been to just run a quick check over something else, because I do think it is wider. And can I just ask, was this raised with you as chair?
So I'm going to jump in there. Yes, I did raise that with you, Tracy, a couple of weeks ago. I gave you the exact same information that I had, and we're discovering more as we progress with this. We didn't know, tomorrow we'll know more about something as well. As we've said before, this is hugely complex. We can't punch and provide us information on XYZ and it pumps it out. It takes hours of work to discover what we're telling you here today. And maybe we could have, let you know 4 or 5 days earlier, but this could be a very small issue. And then we don't necessarily want to blow it up to that as well. And remember, how many have you had reported to you that falls within this category? Is there anyone that is in this category?
Yes.
Yeah.
I've got one.
So you knew about this then?
Can you just explain that, please?
So I intercepted
thankfully, I intercepted a letter to the editor of the Bush Telegraph. Because it was sent to me before it was sent to the newspaper, I read it and I was horrified at what was in the letter. Now, this came from a local ratepayer, and I received that on the 7th of October. And it clearly says in this letter, what he wrote to the paper, it's not all bad news, there is some good. For many years, an elderly gentleman I know, not affected by the present situation, has laboured to pay his rates on time and consequently incurs a penalty on the unpaid amount. Over time, this accumulated into substantial debt, and even paying the regular sum every week, he couldn't get ahead. The council plans to freeze overdue amounts with no penalty for those caught up in the present situation is the best option for all concerned. Better still, the council's taken the opportunity to extend this offer to other ratepayers with long-standing debt issues and is an example of common sense in action. Now, what he's saying here is that this elderly gentleman told him that he had been told by Terroristic Council that this rates rebate policy, that the postponement policy, was going to cover his situation. So when I received that letter, I was absolutely horrified. And so I spoke with Mayor Tracy and I spoke with Councillor Scott. But what I did do was, because he wasn't prepared, he'd already sent the letter. So the Bush Telegraph had received it. So I spoke with the editor and I convinced her that I was concerned that the material in it wasn't 100% accurate. Could she please hold that letter? And she agreed to do that. Now, I think she actually saved us some pretty big angst, to be honest. But that one, that really, really concerned me, that a ratepayer's written a letter to the editor, because he writes pretty acerbic letters, to be honest. But what he was doing was handing out praise. But I saw the need to actually get that withdrawn because I was concerned about, whether it was accurate or not. But it seems that.
So that certainly isn't accurate. You would only get penalties if you've been on an automatic payment or a quarterly and you've failed to make the payments. You don't get penalties on direct debit, but certainly nothing's come from staff to say that postponement will cover anyone in those situations.
Told the person who wrote the letter. He did. I mean, I believe him.
Where he's got the information from.
Well, that's why I raised it, and that's why I stopped it going into the newspaper. I just felt that it needed to be stopped, and fortunately the editor listened, so I think we dodged a bullet.
All right. Councillor Fee, you had a question? Okay. Yeah.
I'll make it quick. As the subject line says, update and direct debit on direct debt issue. We don't want to get into a kangaroo court here. I like your input you're putting in there. I think this is not the debating chamber for this. Well, this is bigger than this. So I think you've covered off update on direct debit issue. Is that true or false?
You're asking me as chair? I think, the issue is, right? The issue is this is an ongoing issue, right? We haven't, right? And we don't want to make this bigger than Ben Hur, right? We've actually got two complete different work streams, right? We've got Rebecca and managing this, managing the interface with the rates postponement and actually going through and advising everybody, right? We've also, as a separate process, and we've got to keep it separate, we've got Ross Franklin, hopefully no relative, no, just common, like Jones, yeah, that is actually doing an independent investigation as an independent person, right? What were the issues that caused it? What does council need to do differently? And are there any other systemic issues that need to be brought to the attention, right? So that's Ross's, right? Now, Ross, right, as I said, is a ferret, right? He will dig to the bottom of it, right? He has been liaising with me. He's been keeping me up to date. And the issue that, and I agree with staff, this is a very manual process, right? Because of the individual relationship that when someone gets behind, there are often unique processes that are put in place for the individual person to manage their debt. And that's the bit we've actually got to, we've got to continue to be mindful of. There are individual, I wouldn't say legal agreements, but there are individual programs that have been put in place for people to get back on track. Now, some of those programs haven't worked, and that's for the job of Ross. And I don't think we can actually prejudge what the reasons are for why that happened at this stage until we actually understand all the information. I think that's what we will see through. Hopefully, we'll see through Ross's report. I will certainly make sure it's right, and I think that's a message that's been given to Ross. And I think this is issue 2 is for staff's perspective. This is a no blame. It's actually what do we do wrong? What do we need to to me, there's systems, processes, and people, right? And when you get a breakdown of one of those, right, you actually potentially get a failure. So what do we need to do to put in place? And what I'm talking about in terms of systems is Civica is not a perfect rate system. I'm yet to find a perfect rate system, so hence we need a whole lot of manual intervention. So what are the things we need to do differently to stop this, and what do we need to do? And what we're doing is, will this actually solve the problem for those who are currently affected, whoever they are? Councillor Peter?
Thanks, Chair Philip. I think Steve's right. This is, we're here to receive this report as to what is being done, not to argue the toss about what should have happened or could have happened or did happen. That will come later, after Ross Franklin's report. So, yeah, with due courtesy, I suggest we just get on with it.
All right. Mayor Tracy, have you got any further comments to make?
Yeah, thanks, Chair Philip. I will forward one directly that I'm aware of directly to Ross Franklin and ask him to assess that to see if it's a direct debit issue that is a little bit wider. The other one, my last question is, you highlighted that there's a risk to BAU. How is that risk being assessed as this issue grows, and what action the chief executive or yourselves are taking to address that, because I don't want everyone's focusing on this and then something else slips off.
So it's really clear that this is a priority for the organisation. So to get the impacted households resolved as quickly as possible. And as it says in the report, the balance of managing BAU pressures and the pressures that come with this project is constantly being monitored and discussed. And the fact is that there will be some BAU that is kind of bumped down the priority list because of this this project, and that's what is partially contributing to the stress that staff are under. It's all part of the same picture. So I'm not sure whether Brian wants to comment any further on any concrete impact on BAU.
Yeah, just further to that, I think we've added resourcing into the team, and other resources have been pulled from other parts of the council to support the rates and revenue team. I think it's a lot of the timelines we've talked about is that we've had to focus to achieve certain timelines, because if we don't, it's stuffed up 3 weeks work. So the absolute focus was to meet the first timeline to ensure the first batch of direct debits were processed for the 20th pay run, because if we didn't, every single letter, well, not every single, but a big chunk of those letters would have been incorrect, and then the amounts on each of those agreements could have been impacted, especially for monthly. So you were going to have to then divide it over, and we would have had to meet with every single one of them again, because rather than doing 100 in a week, if we missed that deadline, they would have been $120 a week, which would have meant we'd had to. So that was the pressure point last week, and that's why things might have. We would hope to provide all the information when we can, but we just, myself, I think I met with dozens of people last week have also been making phone calls, and we've all had to do that because of those real critical timelines. Some of that pressure will ease off now, but there are still real pressured timelines on the way that we must make. So things didn't get done probably that we would have liked to do, so the likes, but it was all just must-dos. So going forward, we hope that, you know, that we can have another look at the resourcing that we'll need over the next sort of 3 weeks. I think the process that we have now in place, even though there's another category here, it's exactly the same process. But it will be more individualized because it's each and every one of them has a different, so we'll still have to be bespoke for them, but we've got the spreadsheets, we've got the process, and they will just fall within that. And that potentially is something that our friends from DMC can pick up, Tech Management Central, to support that as well potentially. So that will help alleviate some of those strains on BAU, and we can pick up a few of the things that we've slowed down doing over the next week or two.
Any further questions? Yep.
Look, just very quickly, and I'm sort of sitting in Councillor Peter and Councillor Scott's court, Steve's court really. I have been chatting to a person I'm dealing with in another part of my life who does look after quite a number of ratepayers, and most of them are all on direct debits, quite a significant number of ratepayers. And in fact, is one of the, he was one of the blokes that I kind of flagged it a little while ago too, but just recently he brought a couple of little things to my attention about these things still occurring. But what he did say in his discussions with the groups of people, he said some may be caught up, as like Rebecca's mentioned, may have addressed direct debits, not necessarily the rates remission thing. But what he did say, he had the feeling one or two probably might just be taking this to their advantage. You got to be careful. Every case is different. Some, he got the feeling some who might have just not put their direct debit up enough, or had some latitude given by staff, had perhaps just jumped on this horse and riding it a bit too. So I think we've got to be careful of councillors. We just don't dive in and grab everything by the neck and think it's our fault too. I think we've got to be professional and make sure they come to Raj or Brian, and because it's very, very complex, and we just got to be careful we don't create more trouble at our level. I think we've just got to, I think we do have to be professional like that, because it's quite, I can just see it's complex when my client is talking about 15 or 20 people, and he's even seeing a little things that might raise a few flags with him. So,
Councillor Scott, are you preparing to move the recommendation? Just tongue in cheek.
In a moment, I'm happy to. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to do that after just making a quick comment. There's been a couple of comments around the table almost about how councillors, and I know I've spoken a fair bit at it, need to be professional, need to sort of lift it up. I just want to get some clarity on that from the councillors that have mentioned it. This is absolutely the place, if we have no other information and we have a short bit in the report, this is absolutely the place for us to ask questions, to get information. And to be frank, that's what we're paid to do. That's why people elect us, to sit at this table to get information about it. So if that is what has been insinuated, that perhaps we should just look at a report and say, let's just receive that and let's move on, then actually I think that this committee would be doing itself a huge disservice. On that note though, I'm more than happy to move the recommendation.
You may second the motion and you may speak to it, Councillor.
I will second it, but I don't know if he's taken a shot at me or not. But what I was mentioning is just the subject title of the report, not the report. Is that a fair comment? Were you actually not? You weren't taking a shot?
I was just making a comment of, there were 3 councillors who mentioned that perhaps we should just take the information and run. I absolutely won't do that.
Can I defend the councillors. I never actually interpreted that, right? Right? The issue for me is, right, I totally agree with you, Councillor Scott. This is the time for questions, particularly around this issue, right, to be raised. I think the issue is that there are, I think we are, as the chief executive, we are still finding issues, for the want of a better word, that need further investigation. Until those have actually been resolved, right, we don't know how big the problem is, right? And I think that's, right, whether it even is a problem, right? If that's fair, Mr. Chief Executive.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think it's just the timing of when you're getting that information was what probably was debated. I 100% agree that this is the place. I think I mentioned that, to debate and ask all those questions. I think it's just how much information do we need to be providing on a outside of this process that I guess I was just trying to get my head around, because especially over the last 2 weeks, it was just really, really tough to provide all of those updates.
Okay, so we've got a mover and a seconder. Councillor Steve, do you want to make a final comment?
I was going to second.
Oh, you have seconded it as far as, okay. All right. All right, so we've got a mover and a seconder. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Are those against? Carried, and we'll take a 5-minute adjournment. Just bearing in mind it is 3 minutes past 11, and I've got a time. My performance appraisal says we need to be finished by midday.
Let's reconvene, and next item is 7.4, our risk management report. And cross-eyed here on page 67. Thank you, Stephen. Take your report as read while you're sitting down. Is there any further key information or further updates you want to bring to the committee's attention? Take that as a no.
Yes, thank you.
There is none?
No, I have a couple of things.
Oh, you have a couple of things?
Yeah.
There you go. Thank you. Oh, sure. Apologies.
Anyone? You still want? Yes. Yes, so the risk management report first, it's just, I just wanted to highlight, one thing. Emerging risk section on page 67. And this is in relation to the last report we made around fluoride and the risk from particular people in the community. And this is the thing that's happening around New Zealand and internationally around people who may pose a risk to organisations, their people, and infrastructure. I've had a conversation with the police about this, and they were really satisfied around the physical security that we're providing and the upgrade that we're doing in fencing, security and cameras and so forth around our plants. But they really wanted to draw our attention to how we gather and manage information about people who may be a risk to the organisation. And so, and it probably fits really well with the fact that we've just put in place a security policy, and we hope to have a security committee in place soon, because what they are looking for from us is, that we build a picture, that we have information coming from across council into one place where we can see the picture more clearly. And so I just wanted to bring that to attention, because I know we all have information, including everyone around the table, and it's a case of how we work towards bringing that into one clear, I would say, intelligence picture. So I just wanted to highlight that. I think it's the only thing that I wanted to particularly bring up on that report.
Thank you. Any questions of Your Worship?
Yeah, Philip, I'll just start on the security issue with the fluoride, and I'm pleased that you did that. But we do need to work as a collective, because those threats I get on a regular basis, and the most recent one I've been sent automatically to the police. So it's I think it's really necessary that you communicate exactly to me how you want that done, because normally I'll copy the chief executive in, but yeah, we are receiving those on a regular basis.
Welcome, Peter.
Chair. We've got a number of budgets that are available to improve our security systems at a number of locations planned. We already have eyes on a number of locations, so that's separate to the issue of IT security, which is another area of concern that we have. So the actual physical threats that we have, we've always had those as council staff and the elected members. It's whether we can actually maintain a cohesive centre collection of that information, so we have an oversight of it and bring it together. So one of the options we could use is our internal CRM system, so we can actually database it, so and develop some process around being able to make sure that all elected members are actually able to feed into that, and also the internal attacks that we might have, so we get that oversight. In terms of the committee, there'd be just a number of key staff, but also I would expect elected member to be on that as well, so that we've got that joint approach.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I wanted to jump straight down to item 6, if that's okay, which is insurance. So hoping that we can get a little bit more information as to what's happened. Some of the key questions that jump out at me is what's our potential exposure been because of the issue with how some of our assets have been categorised, if we have an idea of how that may have happened. But also I'm quite curious to know why this perhaps wasn't identified and picked up by our broker, who does look across lots of different councils and looks at those assets. So yeah, just hoping we can get a little bit more clarity on that, because I want to understand how big that is from an exposure perspective.
You can talk about take something, jump in and explain.
Thank you. So just to take it from step 1, we're talking about 2 different insurance policies here and the assets that are insured under each. So we have a policy, material damage and business interruption, which should have all of our above ground assets, so our land and buildings, our water treatment plants, and anything that might suffer material damage, for example, a fire or a break-in or something like that. And we also have another policy which is unhelpfully named the infrastructure policy.
No, please.
And that relates to assets that are underground, and it's got a very limited scope. It's as I said, it's for underground assets. It only covers damage caused by a natural disaster, and it only covers 40% of the replacement cost, because there is an arrangement that central government has that they will cover the other 60%. Yeah, as long as we have insured the remaining 40%. So, as part of this year's renewal process, what we discovered is that a group of assets, and we're talking mainly water treatment plants, reservoirs, wastewater treatment plants, and wastewater treatment ponds, have been grouped into the infrastructure policy rather than into the material damage and business interruption. So that's the group of assets that we've moved into the correct policy. In terms of the broker question in
Thank you, Stephen. Stephen is right. There's 2 group of policies, and I guess 2 things. Stephen talked about the assets that he has moved with the treatment plants and the impounded supply or the oxidation ponds. This is where it gets a bit. We need to decide as to the assets better fall into which policy based on the event they will likely impact them. Meaning that if you look at impounded supply, what will likely impact impounded supply? Would it be a fire, a vandalism, or would it be a natural event given an earthquake? And if you're saying that's the case, then it's underground assets, not material damage, because an earthquake would impact the impounded supply, earthquake would impact the oxidation ponds, more so material. So deciding which policy becomes, I guess, a judgment for us to look at is where it sits. So that's the first element to that. The second is that there is 2 elements to that. One is the claim quantum and the premium quantum. Claim quantum meaning that anything underground, 40% is insured. We don't insure 100% because an expectation is that in the event we'll get 60% subsidy. Material damage, 100% insured. That reflects the premium as well. So this is where the decision is. So where we have, and I think the complexity then happens is that a treatment plant sits alongside a scheme. So in a scheme, you have the impounded supply, reticulation network, treatment plant, reticulation impounded supply. So how do you componentize and to say that this is above ground, this is below ground? And that would help if, let's say, if we have a high level of componentization of the assets that we can clearly identify where sits where. So that's an improvement plan that I think we'll put in place to make sure that we identify the assets to a level in which we can put them into the appropriate insurance policy. Bearing in mind that sometimes it's not as clear cut to say that, you have dynamic impounded supply and you have a treatment plant and the reticulation network, do you see above ground or below ground? You may have reticulation network that grows above ground at some stage, do you see underground or below ground? So those are the elements. So I guess what Stephen has identified as part of the process, that there were assets that were classified as below ground would mean, like what he explained, dynamic impounded supply and the oxidation ponds, we have moved it to material damage. Again, which policy would best for us given the event? The insurers do give us advice. To answer your question, Scott. Insurers, as part of the process, do give us some guidance and advice, similar to how we explained, to say that where is the assets, is what event could potentially damage the assets, and where you want to place the asset to. We're not driven by the premium. That means let's put it underground, less premium. We're driven by the event. What event could damage the assets? Then we assign that to the appropriate policy. So I guess that's a process we've got to look at as part of that. So that's the context.
Through Chair Philip, just to add to that, I'm going to reach out, but I haven't yet, to Craig Grant for MW LAS, who sits oversight in terms of the insurance, who quite often does a lot of that negotiation with Aon, but also to see if there is a contract, what are the obligations within that contract? I don't know that. I don't have those answers yet, but it'll be a worthwhile process to go in and have conversations to see what if anything, that they're liable. I'm pretty sure that they will say to councils, make sure your schedules are right, without actually going into those schedules.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Peter, then Councillor Steve, and then Councillor Kerry. Did you have a question as well?
Just
okay, but I'll let these two councillors go first if that's okay. Otherwise I lose track. No.
Insurance.
Oh, insurance. Oh, if it's insurance, Councillor Steve, is yours insurance?
Yeah.
Okay, Steve, then Kerry. Okay, thank you.
Again, as we said, we want to try and get some answers in this room. I'm a bit fogged. Something's above ground, something's below ground. I understand the terminology, but obviously this insurance was around last year, the year before, and year before, and year before. In my simple mind, when did something become a snorkel needed piece of equipment where last year it was above ground, now this year it's below ground? I'm trying to understand in a simple term, right, why the classification, I think Scott was probably alluding to that too, had come into it. Why has it all changed? What's changed? We still had the same assets, didn't we? Last year and the year before, and we still had the insurance. I bet you Aon was still sending us a bill. What has fundamentally changed in a 3-line sentence?
Really good question, and I don't have the answer until I've looked at all the assets that has moved across to answer. But what I think has happened is this asset, Sarah just confirmed to me to say, since 2014, this asset has been in underground for this while. So what could have happened along the way is, as you are adding infrastructure assets to the scheme, we've been defaulted, I guess the original was underground. We defaulted all of those additions assets into underground. Stephen could have picked up and reclassified some of it to say, correct me if wrong, Stephen, to say that these are actually above ground. These are not part of the scheme that we have, but they're not physically underground assets. They're part of the above ground. So that's the reclassification that Stephen has taken.
Well, I'm sorry, that doesn't give me much assurance about what the team's doing. Because, 2014, that's 10 years. That's scary.
Through your chair, the original classification, the additions, this is, I guess it's best for me. It's a really good question you're asking. And I don't have the information with me here until I had a look at the assets. So could I guess through your chair, once I had a look at those assets that's been reclassified, looking at the scheme, then I guess, in a better position to clearly answer as to how, because like I say, it could be the additions that has happened recently that we have lumped it together as underground. They actually should have been above ground assets that we added later on during the year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy that the manager actually do a further investigation, because this is what I want, right? I mean, we're talking about ponds, right, as being deemed underground, right? Now, my concern is, the question I have, and I'm not expecting an answer at the moment, is what about all the ancillary pumps, etc., that support the ponds? And if you've got a sewage pond, the aerators and stuff that are actually associated with ponds, where are they sitting? Are they above or below? And what's the process that I want to know going forward is how do you ensure that we've actually got the right assets being insured? Now, you're not going to have the answer now, right? But I would expect that by December, right, at our next meeting. Councillor Carey.
Thank you, Brian. Chair Philip. What I was going to make a comment very similar to that. The insurance world has changed quite strongly, hasn't it, in the last couple of years? And I think our insurance is a significant cost now, a really significant cost. And we've talked about the insurance a little while now, and I think Brian's onto it. I think our council needs to sit alongside others and decide on what level of risk we want. It's about risk assessment. What the heck's our property? What's our policies really cover? If it's going to cost us another 20 grand for this, we need to maybe trim it off elsewhere. But I think it is so significant, the amount of insurance now, we really need to look at that. And I think it's, rather than look at it alongside sitting on our own, it's probably every little council around our region, we have the same problems almost. They won't have the impounded supply, but they'll have everything else. That's all. But just one comment, really, to bear with me a second, about security. We have always had issues with security. Pete made the comment, but what we haven't had is the environment, is the climate we're in now. And at a conference I was in earlier in the year, and I think me Tracy may have been there, the Australian Secretary of their local government association talked at some length about it. And it was so significant there that they were closing council meetings to the public. They were doing Zoom, all sorts of things that you were hard to believe they were doing because of security. And I think we need to have an absolute zero tolerance to it now, ourselves around this table. We do have taken a bit of abuse on the chin. I brought it up at a recent meeting that perhaps Brian and Mayor Tracy are getting, and some of the councils are getting there more than their fair share. But I think we have to have a zero tolerance and look after ourselves. And this is just unacceptable what's being said to us verbally by social media. So just a comment about that, really. That's all. Thanks.
Any other questions? Peter, you had some questions further on in the report, did you?
Back at the film. Yeah, but just while we're on insurance, I understood we were to discuss insurance, both our analysts to come in and the option of taking the risk ourselves on various assets and so on. But it's a major topic that needs to be discussed.
Yeah.
Through Chair Phillip, yeah, I think MWLS have had that sort of question raised across all the councils that are involved in the same scheme as we are, to look at what those, when I contact Craig, I'll ask him about the self-insurance options as well, bearing in mind you do lose that 40-60 split should you need insurance as well. So there's some risks with it, but I'll see where we're at regarding that. Just correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, but we've moved all of these assets that were below ground into the right schedule. So all that work has been done. Okay, thank you.
The one I was concerned with, Philip, is the district plan review. I consider there's a possible risk that it may not be complete on time. There's been 2 or 3 delays now, and I'm starting to worry that it won't be completed, and that could end up costing us money.
Councillor Scott, and then back to Councillor Steve, and this is something on the district plan.
That's insurance.
Insurance, oh.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm back on insurance.
Okay.
Can lead in. Totally appreciate and that the chair has asked for a report to come back for December. So not wanting too much information right now. It was just a final comment that jumped out saying that everything now has been moved to the correct schedules. Do we have a ballpark of what the premium implications of that is? Can that be added into the December report?
The invoices are received on time. They are slowly coming through, but yes, if the information is available, most definitely.
And can we also, through the chair, can we also just have an understanding in that report as to, and it was the first question that I asked, as to what our exposure may have been over that decade? So I think that's a really important consideration. We're talking about self-insurance. Technically, some of our assets for quite a long time just weren't insured. So we've been very lucky we haven't had a major situation.
Through your chair, just to clarify the last statement, the assets were insured. They were included in insurance schedules. It's just in which insurance schedules were they in.
They were in the wrong category.
They were insured.
The right event, is that right? Yeah. So
You still can have an earthquake and still have material damage. Yeah, it's just that the payout would be different. 100% is covered from material damage. Whereas if you say they put in the wrong schedule, then your exposure would be that in the event an underground asset wouldn't be 40% covered. So for example, an impounded supply, it's sitting as underground assets. It is an underground assets. If you move it to material damage, then you're saying they're 100% covered. Whereas an underground asset in the event of earthquake, we're saying the council will cover 40%, whereas we seek our 60% from central government regards to recovery.
Can I just, I just want to clarify. But if that was only if we had a natural disaster. But if we had another event, right, which wasn't covered by the 60-40 split, we wouldn't have been insured.
It's fraud.
No, well, no, it's not fraud. It's not fraud. No, the issue is if you had an event that you lost one of your assets that wasn't related to a natural hazard, right? Don't know what, right? I don't want to, right? We wouldn't have, thank you. Yeah, it's all history now. And I think that's the issue. We've actually picked it up. We actually haven't had a loss, right? The issue is we could have had a loss. And what I want to do is make sure that we've actually got the right processes in place so it doesn't happen again, right? Sorry?
It's report.
It's a near miss report, absolutely, right? It's a near miss report. But the issue is that we would have been covered had there been a natural disaster, but had there been another event, just clarifying, we wouldn't have been covered. That's my understanding of the issue.
You meaning an event that is not a natural disaster?
Correct.
Yeah, be it either flood or earthquake.
Yeah. That affected.
That affected those particular assets.
Through the chair, you're correct. That applies to all our underground infrastructure assets. So we got close to about $150 million worth of assets insured underground. The assumption for all of those assets is that the reason why they're classified as infrastructure is that they would be predominantly impacted by a natural event, and that's why we have them as underground assets insured.
So I think, yeah, the answer to the question for the chair is that if there was a fire that was, you know, an electrical fault, it was unlikely that they would be covered.
Yep, electrical, yeah. Awesome silence. Awesome silence. Right, any other questions on, thank you.
Yeah, Scott was the first part of my question, so now leading on to that, after what Sarah said about if you get the invoice in time, you'll know if it's going to be what the cost is, right? But then that leads back to your original statement at the beginning of today about we don't know where the money's, which jam jar is the money coming out of, so what's our balance sheet, et cetera, et cetera. So we're kind of going around in ever diminishing circles with no factual, and this is not probably any fault of anyone here. Well, there is. No, it's not fault of anyone in the room, but it's the way the system is going back to the system again.
Yeah, certainly we need to look into what's failed in the system that's resulted in these being put into the wrong schedule, and no doubt. So, you know, I do say congratulations to Steve and picking that up. And that shows the value of the internal auditing that Stephen is doing within his role. I do think just in terms of what the impacts around financials, in terms of highly likely to be an increase in premiums, I think we can probably so we need to look at how that can be funding and come back here, and whether or not we look at how we can maybe, you know, look at other insurance options around how we're over-insuring in other areas potentially. And that's why that land rationalisation project, I understand some of those buildings that we do have to offset some of those costs. So there will be a bit of work, and I think working with NWLAS, Craig Grant and our brokers to try and minimise any financial impacts, certainly for this financial year, will be important, noting that this contract starts in December, something.
Okay. November. Thank you. Thank you. Anything further on the risk management report? No. Sorry, Councillor Mike.
Just to carry on for that insurance, I would ask the question at the next meeting, when was the last time, when are we claiming on insurance and for what?
Thank you. If you just make note. Now, I've got in trouble from the committee secretary. We actually technically don't have a meeting, a technical audit and risk meeting in December, but we've got one to adopt the annual report as part of the committee. So we, with the chief executive's permission, we might add a few items to that agenda. Okay, just for yeah, or we'll do something. All right, Councillor Sharon, thank you.
Are you carrying on, or do you want to close off this particular whole report? Because I have some questions around section 5 on pages 93 and 94. Am I allowed to answer those?
So 94, I've got two reports here. I've got the risk management report, and then I've got the assurance management report on page 83, starting on page 83. In my agenda, correct me if I'm wrong.
I have a couple of questions around the reconciliation section of this report.
That's the next item.
Oh.
Happy to move. Happy to move. Second. Right. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Right. Next report is 7.5. Now we've received the Tarura report as well, just for your information. Thank you. Right. Assurance management report 7.5, starting on page 83. Thanks, Stephen. Take your report as read. Is there any further information that you want to bring?
Yes, I just wanted to highlight On page 84, section 3.7, report back the unreasonable customer behaviour policy with the amendments, or
My amendments, happy for feedback on that.
that was around access to elected members and a review process and an appeals process. Thank
Thank you.
Sorry, the only other thing I was going to say is in the issues monitoring section on page 94, just to confirm that we had an escalation in response around the Dannyburg compounded supply, which is at 7.6. So I just wanted to reiterate that went well in terms of we were alerted to a change in the area surrounding the dam, and we initiated the plan, carried out the actions, and the review was completed by Thompson and Taylor, and we were able to de-escalate again, and it was found to be a low risk situation. So that was good exercise of our emergency response plan around the impounded supply.
Councillor Sharon, then Councillor Scott.
Apologies, Chief, I was obviously too keen to keep moving. So in section 5, in this particular thing through you, Chief, on page 93, and at 5.3, we noted that it was going to remain, management report's going to remain open, noting rates reconciliation was late. In 5.8, and I must say I appreciate this explanation of all the little different intricacies that happen. So obviously your auditing was very thorough in that. At 5.8, we obviously have a time in the year when we decide on the rates, and there's a full reconciliation across our whole system effectively, isn't there? What my question is, given that that happens every year, how come we've discovered our issues with rate? Well, wouldn't it give, I mean, I'm not an accountant, Chair Phillip, but to be honest, wouldn't that be a time when a little flag might go up? Actually, these don't match from system to system to system.
I dare not play officer here, but I'll explain, right? So the rates reconciliation that's talked about in 5.8 is a reconciliation between what quotable value have in their system in terms of their values and what records they've got and what records we've got to make sure they actually align, right? That's what 5.8 is talking about, right? But
all reconciliation.
Now I think that's the issue, and I agree with you, right? And if you actually go back in the agenda, right, so back in the report, and this is the bit I've got some issues with, right? You go back to page, in my glasses, 86, age of debtors. I think that to me is, I think, where the issues should have actually been raised, right? I've got some issues about your issue about the rates reconciliation. There's some words that are actually shouldn't be actually used. They've been out of vogue since 2003. We no longer strike our rates. We're anti-violence. We only set our rates now. Just to prove I've read the agenda eventually. Thank you, Stephen.
I guess I'm just concerned, Chair Phillip, that if we have these systems in place and an internal audit picks up, we have an opportunity to improve stuff. How did what has happened and that we're dealing with not get picked up somewhere along the line?
That's a very good question, and that's why we've got Ross Franklin on the case, and that is something that Ross has been looking at.
Oh, it's my case. Thank you, Chief Phillip.
Thank you. Councillor Scott, did you have a question?
I do, thanks, Mr. Chair. Jumping back just one page to page 85. wanted to have a look at the expenditure approval item, and I suppose a few of the things that we're looking at, controls are very, very much at the front of my mind. So notice that, and I think I have asked this before, first raised in 2017, we don't have a target date to complete it. This jumps out as a concern for me. I think having some one-up approval, sorry, I'm looking at the expenditure approval item. I don't like things sitting on these reports for years, not having a target date of completion. So I think either I'd like an explanation as to why we don't think it's important to do and to remove it, or to get it done. Happy for any comments on it.
My comment is I agree, and I think the issue is we actually need, as committee, right, it's our job, exactly what you've done, Councillor Scott, is actually say, as if anything is sort of, it's only beneficial, but why is it still sitting there? We either say we don't believe it's a risk, therefore it should come off, or we believe that it's still an issue and we want a target date of it to be addressed. I totally agree. There's my comment. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, totally agree with both of those comments. I actually thought it was in process, certainly at certain levels it is, but we just need to ensure that whatever needs to happen to get it off first needs to be done. Yeah, thanks.
I agree. Two things. One is if I can go back to the first question about rates reconciliation. You're right, Philip. But to add to that, it is not just reconciling back to quotable value valuation. It's looking at our annual plan and actual rate strike. So that's the reconciliation that we do at a high level. It doesn't look at debtors, meaning it looks at a high level to say we strike an annual plan to collect $43 million in rates. What did we actually strike? What do we actually set to collect? Is it 43 or is it less or is it more? That's a reconciliation that we do. Remember, there's a timing difference between when we adopt the annual plan to what we set the rates, because there'll be some final changes from quotable value, the values of properties, amalgamations, subdivisions that we have to go through. So that is the reconciliation at a total rates assessment level. Regards to this recommendation, and I think you raised at the last Audit and Risk Committee meeting, Chair, that against all of this, you want us to, as management, to review and indicate a date for implementation. I think that's something that we'll go through and do that. And in terms of this particular issues that we've put in place, I guess controls to manage that risk, and to change the system requires a reconfig. So what we're doing is that while we're consolidating request for a change to the PO system, we have put in place controls. So what would be good is, I guess, I'll follow up with Stephen just to test those controls that we have in place. Are they adequate in the interim while we find a permanent solution to the one-up? And I think the auditors always tend to recommend what they call segregation duty controls. They want 2% to do, and we have that through current processes. So I think it'll be quite good. I'll follow up with Stephen just to test those controls, so that even though we may come back to you and say we're going to implement this in 26, the risk is being addressed by the controls that we have in place.
Any further discussions on the assurance management report?
Yeah.
I think.
Thank you, Chair Philip. Yeah, on page 95 or 96, going back to this date thing, and the dates, awaiting arrival of specialised flow meters from Europe, and then it goes down, and it's mentioned all the way down there. I've got date, and then awaiting installation. Well, one there, the Paeatua surface take was in 2022. Now it's 2024. So I'm just trying to get a background on how I'm meant to read that update chart of the 10th of the 10th, 24.
To do with consents.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Has it got the consents or?
I'm just trying
Is that why that's still there? I looked at that as well, that there's 4 above on file.
so they're there because they don't have the consents. Well, some have, because, for example, Danny Big's service take expires in 2026. So the background to the report, and my apologies that I didn't make that clear, is that I think this last meeting or the meeting before, the committee asked us to come back with an update on the resource consent situation and the progress towards dealing with the expired consents. And then that was further, we did provide a report that had all of our consents in it. So the next step was just to focus on what's expired and what's upcoming. So this is an update of resource consents that have expired or their expiry is coming up shortly, and where we are at in terms of bringing those resource consents up to date.
Quick supplementary. So inadvertently, you've actually given us a lot of other dates that we've got the equipment and we're waiting to go, and we've lost out on the consent. So you've actually given us a lot of information there, but there's a lot of stuff waiting to go. It's scary, especially, yeah. Well, I missed something.
Who's answering? The chief executive or Hamish? Hamish falls in your court.
So the physical installation of the meter is kind of the last part. So we have to work through with iwi. We have to do a bunch of measuring of things with Horizons. The great thing is that Three Waters Advisory Group is gaining some traction, and we're getting a lot of buy-in from those affected parties, I suppose, the Horizons and both iwi, which means that we're not in a vulnerable position in that space at the moment. We're very transparent with where we are with those consents with them, and things are progressing. So while the meters are waiting, it's kind of the last step in the puzzle, if that makes sense.
We've only got to put them in basis and get consent.
Get this consent process and install them at the same time. So we've got to do all the other bits first, and then we'll install the meters, and then we'll have a valid consent.
And a quick last one. So going forward, would one be better off to get the consent, make sure you got the meter there, then apply, so you don't get a consent and then the meter's still in England? You know what I mean? I'm just trying to save money. No, too easy. Sorry. Okay.
Sure.
Right. Any further questions? All right. Do I have a mover for the recommendation?
Yeah.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Mike, thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Finally, 7.6, our health and safety management report on page, that's an appropriate number, isn't it? 111. Ambulance required. All right. Thank you, Stephen.
Yes, and I know this is the last report for the meeting, but I know health and safety is dear to all of our hearts, and being last is not a reflection of how we see it. I had a couple of points I wanted to bring up. The first being that we were due to bring back a work program around health and safety to this committee meeting, and we haven't. There's been, the capacity issues around the direct debit situation has delayed that. But I just wanted to mention a couple of things that we are currently doing. So firstly, with Gillian, our health and safety coordinator, has been in place for 6 months now. It's really hitting the ground running, and there is a lot of activity in this space that we weren't able to maintain when we were just treading water while the position was vacant. And just some of the things that she has been working through. And if you think we've taken back in-house solid waste, and then we took back in-house the mobile operations for solid waste, And all of that needs comprehensive first aid processes and documentation and risk assessments done, and that work is progressing really well. And some of the other things that are progressing well are the reinvigoration of our worker engagement through the Health and Safety Committee, which is a really important part of health and safety, is that, you know, workers are fully participating, and we've been, Gillian's organised a lot of training over the last several months that culminated in most of our committee attending the Manawatu Wanganui forum for health and safety representatives. So that was really, really good. And a couple of other areas around our contractor engagement. So we've really nailed down now pre-qualification so that we are now confident that when we bring contractors on board, that they have reasonable health and safety systems in place. So really, really happy to get that. And then the next part of that work program is getting our induction and our ongoing monitoring into a more robust space. And the other big area of work that she's been working on is our critical risk around working alone or remotely, which obviously in the Tararua with our staff, you know, spread out across the district. I would say that that's a really, really challenging change in behaviour for people. But, you know, we're making small gains since we've had the policy in place, and we've asked managers to do risk assessments with their staff around working alone or remotely. But that is a challenging area and is taking a lot of Gillian's time. So I just thought I'd give you that update. We haven't given you a work program going forward, but there is a lot of work happening in health and safety. So firstly, I'll just on page 111, item 3, due diligence. We've penciled in a tentative date for a due diligence visit to the Pahiatua water treatment plant, wastewater treatment plant and refuse transfer station. The committee will be in Pahiatua, the Mayor and Councillors will be in Pahiatua that morning. Not sure exactly where the state came from, but I'm hoping that we can make this work, because the due diligence visits have, you know, we've missed a couple now, and you know, they've really want to get that back on track. The other thing I would like to highlight is just around on page 113 around hazardous substances, and just in response to a written question from so we're reporting to you today for the first time the chlorine exposure incident that happened at Pahiatua Water Treatment Plant in 2021. As you can see that we received this at our office recently. We understand from the worker involved that they had reported it back at the time, but we cannot find a record of that. So we are now in the process of notifying WorkSafe and conducting an incident investigation. Just noting that this went back to a time when the plant was in the handover process. Yeah, and so what we do know is that the process that was involved and led to the escape of chlorine gas has been modified now that the plant is in operation, so that can no longer happen. And yeah, so I just wanted to highlight that this is the first time that you're receiving that information. And also at on page 114 at 5.2, so just further information for that. So this is we've been regularly reporting to you about the severe exposure hazard that we have there in relation to chemicals that are stored inside the plant. The key remediation for that is to remove the chemicals to the outside. That was being hinged on another procurement process, but I now know that that's being separated so that we can move at speed in relation to getting those chemicals out. The reason this is a real priority for council is because at the moment we're relying on administrative controls, which is around PPE wearing, to protect our workers rather than focusing on, and what we want to do is really reduce that risk down by moving those chemicals out. That completely takes that risk away. So just wanted to mention two, and then at 7 on page 115, or actually, I think that's not worded right. It should be 6, the Health and Safety Committee reporting. I'm hoping to bring that as a regular item now to link governance with what our workers are saying and asking about. So just the section on fatigue. This has proved to be a really challenging situation for everyone around managing fatigue for our treatment plant operators, and the actions that we mainly this revolves around our water treatment plant operators are on call, and so they receive alarms overnight and in the weekends that they need to respond to, and so one of the things that the SCADA improvement project will be delivering is a much better alarm system that will be able to manage things like silencing alarms that are not required to be, like if they go once, we can silence them and they don't need to go every hour for the rest of the night if it's not an issue that needs to be dealt with. And also, get a lot of false alarms at the moment. So that project will really help. There's also been implemented stand down provisions so that the team can stand down if they've been called out, sort of say between the hours of 10 and 4 in the morning, night and 4 in the morning, they can stand down for that morning. What the Health and Safety Committee are highlighting is that that's a real challenge to implement for the team, and also the management team. It's really hard to get the resourcing to be able to implement as well. So it's a really curly problem that the organisation is facing in that area. So our workers are talking about it. So I'm just reflecting that up to you as well. And I think that's me. That's my highlights.
Councillor Scott.
I'm sure that was shocking that I put my hand up. A couple of quick questions. Just jumping back to 4.8 on page 112, the violent, aggressive and threatening behaviour. Could you just give me a bit of a definition of what escalation looks like? So it says 2 of them were resolved without the need for escalation. Clearly they're showing up in a report, so they've been escalated somehow. But what do you mean by that?
Thank you. That's a great question, because now I can see how I've used the word. What we've been doing is using the policy that's still in draft, which involves escalation through to a group manager. And the policy in the state it's in has been super helpful in managing these events. And so I'm really looking forward to, formally being able to roll it out. And so when I talk about escalation here, actually talking about the escalation that's in the policy, which means escalating through from informal time.
Thank you so much for that. It was just making sure, and it goes to what Councillor Sutherland was talking about before, of having a bit of a zero tolerance approach to that for ourselves, but also for staff. Now, page 113, I just wanted to dig into the hazardous substances. And glad you got my email. Thanks. But I do try and be helpful and give a bit of a heads up to what I'm looking for before the meeting. I suppose, and it's really helpful information that you've given, and I also understand that the team have some pretty big constraints at the moment, particularly yourself and your timing. But as a governance team, we need to be across big issues that are coming up, particularly, in my opinion, particularly issues that have reached the threshold of requiring a WorkSafe notification. So I guess what I'm trying to work out is, I wasn't notified of that as the governance health and safety champion. what I'm trying to work out is what should I expect to be notified of? Is it a reasonable expectation of mine? Because at the moment, it is an expectation that I'd be at least told at a high level. Is that reasonable? If that's not reasonable, then perhaps we need to have an offline conversation as to what the role is. So I just wanted to double check that.
Yeah, I think you're right. That is reasonable to expect that, and I think that this one has been a little different because it's a historic situation, and so maybe hasn't had the urgency. And saying that it has only recently been reported, we have an investigation plan in place. But yes, you're absolutely correct. I mean, a weak safety litigation, serious situation. They want to hear about anything against the space.
Tracy?
Yeah, Philip, I just wanted to jump to page 117, the incident tag, and I just noticed you've got 11 that are still open. That's nearly 20%, and I just wanted to query, what would be an acceptable number? 20% seems quite high. Is there, are they all recent, or just wanting some clarification around that?
Yes, so in terms of the difference between open and closed, so if an incident is open, it's from our point of view in our office, we haven't gone through the full process. So that will include, investigation and establishing the facts, but it will also include any remedial plans that are in place. And for some of these things, those remedial plans will take some time to come to pass. For example, in there will be the Pahiatua baker situation, with the remedial plans over the months. So I'm comfortable that we are on top of the reports that we've had in and making sure that they're investigated in a timely manner and that there are remediation plans in place, and that we are doing the follow-up with whoever owns those plans.
Councillor Scott again. Oh, Councillor Sharon.
It's on the same topic.
I'll let Councillor Sharon have the.
No, mine's a different topic.
Oh,
If you want to stick to the same topic, you go for your life.
Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just on the incident reports, can I just double check 8.7 does indicate to me that nothing is open that is older than August? Are those two things are linked up, or I just want to double check?
Yes, so that's a good question. Just as our first,
Of labeling, the labeling, I assumed that, but
I'll just confirm, this is the first time we've used the reporting from the 365 Act that we manage all this on. And so these are good questions that we can go back and check on.
I like that. I like the reporting.
Councillor Sharon.
Thanks, Chief. Just a quick comment. I'm very grateful, Steve, that you've highlighted some of the preemptive, preventative training that's going on. That's always a really good sign to me that the organisation is gearing itself up to deal with these issues. On a lighter note, I certainly commend the training that's going on with the frontline staff around dealing with difficult people. On a lighter note, I offered to role model in those training sessions, but respectfully, my offer was declined. So. Saving me then. Excellent.
Moving on, thank you. Councillor Steve.
Yeah, just page 117. Now, these are just staff members, is that right, that chart? Okay, well, I should know, but I don't know off the top of my head. What is your total number of staff? What is that as a percentage of 11 aggressions? Just trying to figure out if everyone, is it being aggressive? Aggression? Is that the deal? No? It is, eh? So what is that as a percentage of, I'm just trying to figure out if there's any angry people out in the hallway, aggressive people around. If you work that back as a percentage, I'm just trying to feel the happy vibe.
Yeah, so this is aggressive customers.
Yes. Oh, customers. Yeah. I said, I thought, I was hoping it was customers. I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Peter.
The vet.
A little bit of useless information for you, Mr. Chairman. They were talking about chlorine gas. It was estimated 1,100 were killed when it was first used at EEP, or wipers as it was often called by the Germans in 1914. It's April the 22nd. So it's quite effective stuff.
No. Thank you for that. I can see the meeting suddenly deteriorating. Right. I know we've gone past our best by time. I've got, you said we're going to do an on-site on the 4th of December for Paeatua.
Yeah.
My calendar had that originally it was going to be the 10th, so I could attend.
And that day is also strategy and growth committee meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so let's just put that in. Let's have a think about that. All right, no need for a decision now. December the 10th. The issue for me too is 8.8. Near miss report. A near miss report, incidents that occur, to me is right, hopefully Councillor Scott might agree with me, an incident that could have occurred. So someone actually avoids something and they say, if I hadn't avoided it, we would have actually had an event. Yeah. I think that definition, just so clarity, right, I think really needs to be, it's an avoidance as well. I think that might help with your numbers. Hopefully we get more of them. You know, the more near miss reports, the better I feel. Because someone has actually avoided something, and therefore that's a good thing, right? The other issue too is it's minor, right? I'm surprised that we actually, considering our policy on having safe vehicles, we had a total failure of a trailer hub. What, you know, to me that's could have been catastrophic, and why wasn't that picked up earlier? Well, is my question. You may not have the answer now, but you know, that to me is. Oh, Hamish, you got the answer. Thank you.
First question, Chair Phillip. So the trailer was a new purchase from a supplier. When we put it into use, within the first few uses, that trailer hub failed. So it turns out it was a manufacturing error. Went straight back to the manufacturer. They remedied it, and we have had no issues since. So yes, it was a manufacturer's error.
Thank you. Right. Okay, no further questions or comments. Happy to, we've got a mover. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sharon. All those in any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. It's carried. Your Worship, would you like to have the closing karakia, please? Thank you.
Let the winds of the Ruahine and Tararua give you strength. Let the waters of the Manawatu nourish you. For we are the Pounamu of Te Tāpiri Nui o Whātonga. Kia ora.
Thank you, everyone. Sorry for the chairs and bills going over by 16 minutes. Thank you.